Hey guys, Jeff here to talk about a little horror film called The Collector. Um, I was thinking I might be doing something a little different this time, which is just kind of reading my written review because I think I actually did a pretty decent job on the written review and nobody read that either. So why not? Maybe. So this time, I think I'll try reading the written review and maybe expanding upon it at parts when I feel like it. So I said, The Collector wants to be a sharp horror thriller in the same vein as Saw, but it doesn't want to put in the work to get there. I said it's like a horny guy who would rather pay for sex than jump through all the hoops of meeting somebody and wooing them. The film is directed by first-timer Marcus Dunstan. He's a screenwriter who jump-started his career with Feast before he went on to the Saw sequels. His body of work skews toward an adolescent audience. It's me taking a jab at him, I guess. Which is fitting because the storytelling here is adolescent in nature. It just wants to get to the fun parts. And I guess I made that my first paragraph because that was the main thing that stuck out to me. The thing is a mess. Anything but the horror is a mess in it. Yeah, in the first 15 minutes, I quickly lost my patience and nearly wrote the film off. The premise might have had some weight to it if it wasn't so poorly constructed. The beginning and most of the story, like I just said, is a jumbled mess to the point where it is confusing. And to give you a little synopsis, if I got it right here, the story centers on an ex-convict named Arkin, played by Josh Stewart, who is in desperate need of money so his wife or ex-wife, who knows, can pay off a loan shark. So he decides to steal a diamond from a house that he's working on, this big rich house. The family is supposedly on vacation. But he also needs the money tonight, like that night. And since he's an ex-convict, he conveniently knows some criminal dudes who will give him money for it that night if he could get it. Which I think they just threw that in there so the plot would make more sense, because just getting a diamond doesn't get you the money that night. But unfortunately, when he shows up at the house, this is when the actual movie begins. The horror movie part of it begins. The family is still there, and they're all being tortured by this maniac who's running around the house setting up death traps. And so when our main character, the ex-convict named Arkin, breaks into the house, he also gets snared in that trap. And instead of trying to escape by himself and calling the police, he of course wants to save the family. Don't really question his motivation because he's not much of a character. And here I said it's not so much that the film rushes through the setup, although that's part of the problem, but it feels like it has no interest in it, as if crucial elements like story and character are chores that have to be done. It's just really put together so poorly that it's hard to get a grip on what's going on at the beginning or why you should care. Or I don't even know if you should care. Who cares? Once you make sense of it, you'll likely see it as a missed opportunity that goes through the motions to get to the gory shenanigans. I mean, Arkin is forced to make a tough choice at the beginning. I said that is if he were a character instead of a cardboard cutout. He's risking his freedom and self-worth by returning to a life of crime to ensure the safety of his family. There's something there that could have some meat on it if they just put a little bit of work into it. I wrote, wouldn't it be nice if at least one scene was devoted to showing this internal conflict, even if only on his face as he looked in the mirror, struggling to choose, make his choice. It would help to build sympathy and create a character worth caring about. Instead, Arkin is an empty vessel who moves forward on the plot's thin conveyor belt. But somewhere in the middle of this is that there is a functioning little horror thriller with some good scares and a lot of intense moments and some decent action even, and lots of gore. I said, sure, it relies on coincidences, dumb behavior, and gaping plot holes, and it does. But these are also problems with the storytelling, not so much with the mechanics. The technical aspects of the film and the moment-to-moment scares, they work. Dunstan is good at working within the genre, but he hasn't given himself much to surround it with, much to surround that action-filled center with. Some people would call the horror here torture porn, and I've never agreed with that line of thinking. Um, I grew up in the '80s on a diet of slasher flicks, and so I'm convinced there is a place in the horror genre for these types of movies. It's just one flavor of horror, different from the creepy cerebral horror that impresses the majority of professional critics, but is not inherently better or worse in terms of quality. You really have to approach it on its own terms, what it's trying to do. Plus, the torture porn label here isn't even entirely accurate. There's some great suspenseful cat and mouse stuff as the killer is pursuing Arkin around the house. And sometimes, the tables turn a little bit. It's good cat and mouse. If you can focus solely on the action and ignore any sort of logic or the plot, there are some fun parts. And the killer, the collector, I think he really had the potential to reach some, maybe not iconic status, but at least some sort of mainstream acknowledgement. I mean, I wrote there's a predatory insect-like quality to him, and his mask gives me the creeps. It did. I said this in the review. It kind of feels inspired by Michael Myers masks and maybe Jason's burlap sack from Friday the 13th Part 2. And it's basically like a combination of this is what it looks like. It looks like a ski mask crossed with an S&M mask, but it's almost like it looks hard, like plaster on his face or something. There's just something about it that stands out, and it feels defined, and it feels like this could have been a memorable horror character. But again, it's a shame that everything around those core horror mechanics are so shoddy and mediocre. The film looks good, but it is, I hate this. It bugs the hell out of me when directors do this. It's too stylish for no reason. Just with the lightning flashes and the quick cuts and stuff like that, sometimes it's kind of annoying. It doesn't have any sense of subtlety, and it features an obnoxious industrial rock soundtrack. I can't stand that stuff. But really, worst of all, it's an empty film that it has a simple story that could have had some substance, and it could have just been kind of interesting as a story, but instead it's shallow and honestly hard to follow. Someone back me up on this. And there really are too many things that don't make sense if you scrutinize them at all. So turn off your brain, enjoy the parts in the middle. And I said at the end here, I'm not a big fan of the Saw films, which is what this guy started off. He started off writing like Saw 4, 5. God. Marcus Dunstan, the director, he started off as a screenwriter. As I said in the beginning of this, he did this movie called Feast, which got him, broke him onto the scene. And then he started writing Saw sequels, like 4, 5, and 6 he wrote, I think. But, I don't really like Saw. I don't like any of the Saws, really. But, the people do like them for the mythology, the Saw movies. They like them for the mythology that surrounds the Jigsaw Killer. And the clever traps, which usually, at least in the first one, I hope if I remember correctly, they usually force the victim to make some sort of impossible decision, choosing between two horrible things. And here, the traps are just crude and functional, which I don't totally mind. That doesn't bother me, but, and they're designed merely to maim. And I said, this is the last line of my, let me just read it for you straight out, because I kind of like how I ended it anyways. I'm not a big fan of the Saw films, but people like at least the first few of them for the mythology that surrounds the Jigsaw Killer and the clever traps, which usually, force the victim to make an impossible decision. Here, the traps are crude and functional, designed merely to maim, and so is the killer. And I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars, which I think is a good score for the movie. I think I'm being a little easy on it. Definitely could have been a bit more there. Like I said, you could probably sit through it if you're into horror movies. If you're not into horror movies, avoid it. That's about it. Thanks for watching, guys. Next up, I'll be talking about Breaking Bad season finale and Edge of Darkness with Mel Gibson. So, see you then. Thanks for watching.